Hello and welcome back to the NFL DFS slate breakdown for week 4. It's going to be a fun one. A lot of stuff to go over. Before we do, come join us at LineStar. Only $39.99 gets you access to all the props, all the DFS for everything we cover. It is the best deal in the industry. Nowhere gives you props and DFS for only $40 for all of the sports. But we do, so come join us. Now, let's get into the slate. It should be a fun one. We're going to go over a little bit of an overview of the slate itself and then go over some projected ownership and our matchups tool after that. So, quick slate overview. Obviously, the Miami and Buffalo game is one of most interest due to the highest game total. Now, one of the things that is interesting to me is they are not the highest owned team or stack. So there's a lot of different ways to go on this slate. Other interesting spots, obviously, Raiders at Chargers. Then we got Broncos at Bears. We got Vikings at Panthers. Rams at Colts. All of which are interesting. And I think you also got to talk about the 49ers and the Eagles because their team totals are going to be so high. Now, the highest paced games are a little bit different. Highest paced one is Rams and the Colts. That is the highest paced game. The next highest paced game, New England at Cowboys. And then it is Steelers at Texans and Vikings at Panthers. I bring those up because they aren't necessarily all the highest scoring games, but they're highest paced, and I think those are the games that have the higher likelihood of shooting out a little bit more, given what their game total is. So now I don't expect a 42-point game total of Steelers at Houston to put up 60 points, But hey, they could be mid-50s. However, one of the things I do need to bring up about that game is that Houston's offensive line is totally decimated. And against Steelers in a matchup where you already have to get the ball out, it's going to have to come out even quicker. So CJ Stroud may not have time or much time, but that game is still of interest. Now, let's get into projected ownership a little bit and go over some plays there. So at the quarterback spot, I think it's very interesting what ownership is doing. Kenny Pickett, Russell Wilson, Justin Fields, all lower priced quarterbacks, and almost 40% of the ownership is going there. So that is obviously of interest to take note of because it's not that hard to just pay up for a quarterback and then you're kind of flipping the slate a little bit and you're going to be getting different than the field by doing that alone. So that is definitely interesting. The other thing is that I don't love Kenny Pickett. Kenny Pickett is only 5,100, but he hasn't really done much. 20 points is not going to win you a GPP. We need 25-30 out of the quarterback. And I do think the Texans are a little bit better defensively than they get credit for. Ranked 10th, only allowing 214 yards. Only allowing 32 pass attempts. You can run on them. The Steelers are likely going to run. So I don't love Pickett. Then you got Wilson and Fields. I don't love either of them. Yes, both teams are terrible. Both defenses are terrible. But the offenses have both looked terrible too. So I think it's a very weird week for the quarterback position right now. Hurts, he is not in a bad spot whatsoever. He has crushed Washington 1 week a year for the last couple years. Is it this week that he crushes them? Or is it next time that he crushes them? Either one, I think it could happen. And he absolutely can throw for 300 yards, throw 3 touchdowns, and run in for 1. It's not, out of the realm of possibility for him versus this Commanders team. Josh Allen, only 12% owned, and in the highest game total of the week in a decent spot. Miami ranked 31st, allowing a lot of pass attempts. 26, allowing a lot of yards. Miami allows 61% more fantasy points when away. I think there's a lot of stuff going into Josh Allen's favor, and he's being overlooked a little bit. One thing I will say is the team has been more conservative than they usually are. So that does worry me a little bit about 8K Josh Allen, but this guy is a gamer. And if this game is close, I think they're going to get aggressive. And part of the reason they maybe have not been as aggressive is they haven't had to, because they blew out the Raiders. They blew out Washington. They lost to the Jets, but it was a close game. But that Jets D is legit, and they still put up, 16 versus them. So I think Josh Allen's interesting. Purdy is a little interesting. However, he might be missing some wide receivers, which we will talk about a little bit later. If the wide receivers are out, CMC is going to get more work there. Herbert is in a great spot. Raiders can't stop anybody. They're not going to stop the Chargers. And with Mike Williams out, with Eckler doubtful, that tree of targets just shrinks a little bit more and makes it even easier to stack than it already was. So he is absolutely interesting there. Kirk Cousins keeps having 30-point games. It's in the realm of possibility again. Fast-paced game. And Carolina D does not scare me. Tua, we got to bring up. He's unowned and has been crushing it this season. Highest paced game, or highest scoring game of the week. He's in a spot where he might have to throw a lot, and obviously that means fantasy points. He's also getting Jalen Waddle back, so I like Tua. Going to the running back spot. Tony Pollard in one of the highest paced games of the week, but New England is good versus the run, so I don't love it. His workload and that price, are both very much in his favor, so I understand the 22% owned. I just don't think this is the week he has a ceiling week, and with him being high owned, harder for me to get there. Kyren Williams and Zach Moss, we'll talk about them both together. They're in the same game. It is in a game we like. A game environment, one of the fastest paced games of the week, good total. I think this game is going to have some points, and it's one we want to target. So either guy is interesting. Colts ranked 28th, allowing 1.1 rush TD per game over the last 9. Kyron's got a ton of goal line work, and he's likely in line for a huge workload once again today, or this weekend. Zach Moss is in a very similar situation. Rams have allowed a lot of rushing, and Moss's workload has been insane. 22 touches week 2, 32 touches week 3. This workload is for real, and I don't mind going back to that. McCaffrey. All right, now we got to talk about these 49ers wide receivers. Ayuk missed last week, is questionable. Debo got hurt last week, is questionable. Jawan Jennings is doubtful. Their top 3 wide receivers are all questionable or doubtful. One of them likely misses. It leads to needing people to throw the ball to. CMC is going to get some. Maybe Eli Mitchell plays a little bit more because CMC's getting more involved in the passing game, but he's going to likely get more targets. Makes him very, very interesting and a must-consider guy. With that, I'll just say it because I'm on it now. We'll touch on it again later, but you should also consider George Kittle at tight end if those guys are going to be out for the 49ers. Rachaad White, I don't love it. This Saints D is solid against the ground. He has a great workload, though, so at 5,600, I understand why people are going there. I'm just not going to follow the chalk there. Javonte Williams, look, he's splitting a workload, but the Bears D is bad. However, the part that is a little bit better is their rush D. And chalk Javonte Williams just scares me. I think that you could go Samaje Perine, who has say 50 or 45% of the work instead of 55% and at no ownership. And you could luck into a touchdown and then you crush all those Javonte lineups. So I think that is likely the way I would go if I was playing Denver. DeAndre Swift. Look, he looks insane. His price is still too low. This is a game where in the second half, there is a very, very high likelihood they are going to be running a lot. Swift is very interesting. Alexander Mattison. Cam Akers is likely going to play this week. He was inactive last week. Madison, I do think, is in a very good spot, but we're unsure about how much Akers is going to play. Pay attention to the news coming into lock. If they're talking about him like he's not going to get much, which that's what the Vikings have done in the past. They've had one RB1. Madison used to be the 2, and he didn't get much work unless Cook was out. If that is the situation, once again this week, I think Madison's in a very interesting spot. Outside of him, Josh Jacobs is somebody that you absolutely need to bring up. Chargers are vulnerable for the run. Josh Jacobs can absolutely break a slate, and he can put up a 25-plus point game against this Chargers D that just isn't that good at stopping the run. James Cook, one of the game environments we really like. He is a very, very good running back. The issue, we are going to need him to break off a 15, 20, yard run to get a touchdown. He's not being used in the end zone, but if he breaks one of those off, you're getting some access to this game at very low ownership and not that expensive for a guy that could, and he has the skills to break the slate in a spot that's interesting. Miami allows 41% more fantasy points to running back one away, allows 31% more rushing attempts away. It's a good spot for Cook. It's just he needs that touchdown to really pay off. But I like it. Kamara's in a very tough matchup. First week back. Don't love it. Don't hate it. He is an exceptional talent at a fair price. So it's interesting. Stevenson does have the skills to get it done. It is an Ezekiel Elliott revenge game, though, so who knows there. That's just the narrative streak talking there. Jaylen Warren and Najee Harris, they're in a very good spot. You can absolutely run on Houston. You'll also be taking out that Pickett ownership. The issue is that it is a split. Najee hasn't done much. I think Jaylen Warren is the much better back, but you're going into a 50-50 split and hoping you get the right guy. Don't mind having a little of both if you're making a bunch of lineups. Very hard to click if you're only doing, 1 to 3 lineups. But definitely gets you a little bit different there. Let's go to the wide receiver. Devontae Adams and Jacoby Myers. That Chargers D is awful. Derwin James is likely to be doubtful, or he is doubtful. And it's been a thing you can continually do right now is pick on that Chargers D. Now, Jimmy G is questionable. He is in concussion protocol. Pay attention to news. If he doesn't play, it obviously hurts them a little bit, but I think there's still upside there with either Hoyer or O'Connell to do something. There's just been so much of the targets focused on those two guys. If this game is a shootout and they're, in a spot where they got to throw against a bad defense, both the guys could really do some damage. Josh Downs getting a ton of work for 3,500. Don't love it. I just don't know if his upside's really there. But I get why he's doing work. And actually last week, if he could have got me a touchdown, I could have had a takedown. But he didn't. So maybe I'm just a little a little tilted. Keenan Allen, 7,900 for a 33% target share is probably a little too low priced in a good matchup. I think he's in a great spot. Justin Jefferson is Justin Jefferson. one of the only guys that you can count on, say, 10, 12, 30-point games this season. And, you know, he definitely has that in his bag. Tyreek, Chase, all are in consideration. Tennessee, who Chase is playing, is my new punching bag at wide receiver. I am going to keep taking shots at that defense. I think it's terrible, and I don't think they can stop the wide receiver ones. And so Chase is in a very good spot this week. With that being said, I don't love Burrow. The reason I don't love Burrow is Tennessee is better when it comes into the red zone. And I don't see Burrow having a 4-touchdown game. I see him having a 2-touchdown game, putting up a decent score, but not quite enough. When he's not going to be running because he has that calf injury too. Not that he's a huge runner anyways. George Pickens versus Houston, very interesting. Number 1 at 5,400. Tank Dell, 4,600, I think is very, very interesting. Tank Dell is likely to play a lot of the slot. Pittsburgh Steelers rush the quarterback very well. Houston front is beat up. They're going to have to get the ball out quick. I think Tank Dell is likely the recipient of that a lot of the time. Puka is very interesting. Tyler Higbee is questionable with an Achilles injury. With that, they play similar spots. Puka could be in line for a big target game. Adam Thielen, got to talk about him. Once again, he's been crushing week in and week out. It's a good game environment to throw on the Vikings, so Thielen is interesting. One thing I will say, the Vikings have got beat a couple times going deep because they're bringing pressure these days, and that's not really Thielen's game. He's not going to get the 60-yard bomb. He might get a couple 20-yard catches or a 7-yard out for a touchdown, but he's not going 60 for you. So some of the other Carolina receivers could probably do that. Josh Palmer, 4K, way too cheap for his upside. Cortland Sutton, I don't love Quentin Johnston. He apparently hasn't been lining up in the right spots in practice, and Kellen Moore is a little down on him. I'm sure he plays. I just don't think he's going to play 70%. I think he's going to play 25, 30%, something like that. All right. Chris Olave, I absolutely love this week. You are going against a very poor secondary of the Bucks. You have Jameis Winston, who just wants to chuck the ball down the field, and Olave can absolutely run under that thing and snatch it. So I love this spot for Olave. Cannot believe he is going so low owned. Zay Flowers, look, he's the only healthy wide receiver. They got him, and they got Andrews. Bateman and OBJ are likely out. Get over to the tight end here. Freiermuth likely going high just because of the environment and that Pickett is higher owned. I have a hard time going to chalk Chig Okonwu. Jake Ferguson I am very much interested in at only 3,500 in one of the faster game scripts of the week. It's also one of the last games, and Ferguson has the most red zone targets of anybody. So that's interesting to me. Tight end is a very weird spot today or this week. I absolutely love George Kittle if some of those wide receivers are out for the 49ers. Ayuk was out last week. He got 9 targets. If 1 or 2 of them are out, his targets go through the roof. His ownership probably goes up too, but even at higher ownership, I'm down to just click that button if those guys are out. He is probably my favorite. Browns have been very good on D, but Andrews is of interest as well. And really, tight end as a whole this week is pretty gross, but we do need to bring up Donald Parham, Gerald Everett. The 2 Chargers tight ends are interesting with Mike Williams out. They are legit red zone threats, and with more targets still to go around, they likely get a couple. And Everett was really good last year when one of those main receivers were out. So I definitely am interested in those guys. Higbee's questionable, so careful. If he plays, I am of interest. Defensively, Eagles definitely make sense, but they're high owned. I think Tampa Bay makes a lot of sense. Winston chucks the ball up, so it is a game environment of which maybe they are able to get a couple interceptions or fumbles or whatnot. Low game total is always interesting. That's usually part of how I attack my defense, as well as I think Ravens and Cleveland are interesting, as the Saints are as well. All of those defenses should be cheaper and of interest. 49ers are probably the pay up option on the slate that interests me the most. Click over to FanDuel real quick to just run through the ownership to see if it is similar. All right, so on FanDuel, Fields is absolutely chalk. Allen is much higher owned, but not too bad. Stafford is making a leap up, which does interest me. I obviously, talking about him earlier, do have some interest on him. I think that there is a chance that this game is very quick, and with that, Stafford can target guys a lot. So you can do a double stack and get pretty much all of his points just doubled up, which is interesting. Got to bring up Tua once again, going unowned. Cousins going pretty low owned as well. All of them are fairly interesting. And you got to bring up Jameis Winston. I said I don't mind the Tampa Bay D, but I also can see a path where Winston throws for 300 yards and 3 touchdowns at only 6,500 and breaks the slate. So it's just that Tampa Bay secondary is not good. Definitely interest there. Javonte, way too high owned on FanDuel. Pollard, McCaffrey, Cook, all these guys make sense as far as highest owned. Tyreek, Devontae, Stephon Diggs, Chase, Jefferson. That's really how it should be. It is interesting that all of these guys are on the high owned side. It's going to be hard to get to more than maybe 2 of them on one team. I think there's a lot of guys middle priced that are interesting on FanDuel that we can pivot to take advantage of. One being Chris Olave, 7,900, almost unowned. Zay Flowers is there. One thing that I have to bring up is Palmer. Palmer's not on this list. He's all the way down at 3%. He's going to get a big bump up. He is absolutely interesting as well. I think on FanDuel, there's definitely ways to get different. Not saying fade these guys. These are the best plays on the slate, except for Keenan Allen should be a little bit higher up. Ownership is, probably just right on FanDuel. Tight end ownership, I can't go to Schultz. He just hasn't been used that much, and being that high owned is just crazy to me. I know he's cheap. I don't care. Would rather get different. Rather get to Kittle or Ferguson for a little bit more. Defense, I don't like to go for defense that much just because there is so much volatility. What I do look for is I look for teams that can get after the quarterback. Hopefully teams that are going to have to throw and lower game scores. And, go after that. Or if it's not a lower game score, a lower team total, like San Francisco's going against Arizona. Arizona has a very low team total. So San Francisco's interesting to me. And they're not going that high owned and not that expensive. So that's kind of what I do there. So all in all, very interesting week. Let's do a quick look at the matchups. We'll go to the DraftKings one just because I do feel like a few more people like DraftKings than FanDuel. But the matchup tool is not going to be too much different. Stafford, Fields, Garoppolo, highest guys. Winston right there, who we talked about being interesting and being low owned. It's interesting that all these guys are up high because, outside of Fields, most of them aren't very high owned. The one thing, though, that we do have to bring up, Herbert's in a decent spot. Josh Allen's in a decent spot. Those guys are definitely interesting, and you have to consider them. Tua is at the bottom of this list, but I would still consider him. He's going unowned, and he can break the slate. Whenever you have a quarterback that is as good as him or Mahomes going this low owned in a high scoring game, you have to consider them. RB wise, Herbert, we know they're in a good spot against the Broncos. The problem with the Bears running game is it's like a 45-55 split, and they've been terrible. So hard to want to go to either of them. Moss, we talked about, we like. Harris, we like. McCaffrey, we like. Javante's in a time split also. You could just as well go to P. Ryan and get the same matchup at no ownership. Jacobs, we love. Kelly's one we should probably bring up. Without Mike Williams, they may try to run a little bit more, and it's a good running environment. He's just been awful so far. So was that just matchup based and he just had a tough time, or is he just bad? It's not really something we're, getting paid to try and figure out. We just want to know if he's going to be good this week, and he has a great matchup, and he's going to have the opportunity at a cheap price, so he should be of interest. Cook, Pollard, all these guys we have talked about. On the low side, White, we talked about him being too high owned. Kyron Williams is interesting that he's down here. The one thing I would say is Travis Etienne crushed them, and then they had time splits for the last two matchups, so I don't mind going to Kyron, even though he's a little bit further down on the list. Wide receiver wise, a lot of interesting names up top. Mingo is someone that has played a ton. He's got some targets, and, he is a young athletic guy. Maybe he can be that guy to break down that Vikings defense and get deep. Adams, Nakua, Olave, all of these guys we've talked about that we like. On the bad side, we got Pickens, Dell, Waddle, Hopkins. Tight end, best spots, Kittle, Higbee, Troutman, Everett. Outside of Troutman, we talked about all three of these guys and being of interest in them. One thing that I do have to say that I am not as happy to see, Ferguson is just a little bit lower on the list. New England has been tough versus tight end. But how the tight end situation is shaping, you really just need a touchdown unless you have, say, Kittle or Andrews break the slate, which it's not likely. So that will do it for us today. We went over everything, did it quick, hit both FanDuel and DraftKings. Good luck to all of you this weekend. Hope you guys win some money. Please make sure to like, comment, and subscribe to our channel. Helps us out a ton. Just improve the reach and keep giving you guys more and more content for free. Have a good weekend, guys. Be back next week. Good luck.